Hello everyone, Dark of All Trades here. Now today, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to talk about morality. But Dark, I hear you say, you talk about morality all the hecking time. Well, my faithful and of no doubt above average intelligence and appearance viewer, this time it's going to be different. This time I'm going to respond to an apologist. But Dark, I hear you say, you respond to apologists nearly every hecking week. Patience, dear viewer, I'm going to do something more than just a straight response. Just stick around and you'll see. So today's video comes from a podcast channel called The Brock Laurie Show. It's a short titled Atheists Can't Have Morality - The Brock Laurie Podcast. Now, I know your first instinct is to jump right in and respond to that title. But remember, patience. I promise to take us where we need to go on this. So without further ado, let's see why Brock Laurie thinks atheists can't have morality.
Only heaven silence for an answer.
Every atheist wants to consider himself to be a very upright citizen.
Right.
I'm a good person, I'm a moral person, but they don't actually think why they even should be a moral person.
Okay, right off the bat, we're starting with a straw man. I know atheists who are moral. I know atheists who are jerks. Just like I've met Christians who are generous, and Christians who lie and cheat. The issue here isn't belief, it's behavior. What Barack is really doing here is projecting. He assumes atheists must be faking goodness because he can't imagine being good without divine supervision. He thinks he has a criticism of atheism, but what he really has is an accidental self-own.
If you really do not believe in God, then there is no reason for morality. There is no morality.
And we continue with a classic false dichotomy. He's saying that if you don't believe in his God, morality simply doesn't exist. He is saying that when it comes to morality, he has an intellectual monopoly. There are mountains of moral systems developed by people who don't rely on divine command, and they actually work. He just dismisses them, not because they fail, but because they don't start with his conclusion. He is pretending to use reason, but it's just his dogma. You can't declare morality non-existent just because you don't understand it outside of your own religion.
Yeah.
Other than your belief to yourself that it's necessary for the functioning of civilization.
Wait, didn't he just say there was no reason for morality without God? And now he's giving one that it's necessary for the functioning of civilization? So, which is it? This is classic dismissive reductionism. He acknowledges a secular reason and then shrugs it off like it doesn't count. But empathy, reciprocity, game theory, evolutionary psychology, those aren't footnotes. They're actual mechanisms behind why humans behave morally, and none of them require divine permission. He basically just said, outside of my McDonald's bag, there's no food in the house, except in the fridge, pantry, garden, but those don't count.
Right.
Which is what I used to think.
Yeah.
When I was an atheist, I got to tell you, looking back now, I really was an honest atheist.
Sure, the old "I used to be an atheist" line, totally real and not made up for apologetics reasons. But that isn't very fair of me. Let me just assume he's telling the truth. The translation for this is, when I was an atheist, I was just waiting for a chance to commit crimes. Well, I don't think that is being honest. He's not describing what atheists are like. He's describing what he was like without that divine babysitter. So if your moral compass points straight to doing bad things the moment God's not looking, maybe the problem wasn't atheism. Maybe it was you.
I said, okay, I'll play by the rules.
Right.
Because I don't want to get arrested.
This sounds like a reason an atheist could have to be moral. I guess his whole premise is false. Hoisted by his own petard. I've been waiting to use that line. In developmental psychology, especially in Kohlberg's states of moral development, there is a clear distinction between two types of moral reasoning. What I'll call A thinking is intrinsic motivation. People do good because it aligns with who they want to be, a good person, a fair person, someone who contributes to society. Think of it like someone who doesn't speed because they want to be safe and respect others on the road. Then there's B thinking, extrinsic motivation. That is doing good to get the reward or avoid a punishment. This would be someone who doesn't speed only because they don't want a ticket. It's about consequences and not character. What Barak just described, I didn't want to get arrested, is classic B thinking. His moral restraint wasn't rooted in ethics, it was rooted in fear, which I might argue makes his divine babysitter more impactful for him. But here's the problem. If your morality disappears the moment there are no consequences, then what you're putting forth here is not really morality, it's risk management. That's a confession of underdeveloped ethics.
Sure.
Yeah.
But if there's no morality, then and if I can get away with it, I'll get away with it.
This is where his argument really shows its hand. If there is no morality, then I can, and if I can get away with it, I will. So not only does he reject the idea of any secular moral reasoning, he goes a step further into pure opportunism. If he thinks there are no cosmic consequences, then suddenly anything is fair game. But just because he doesn't recognize other moral systems doesn't mean they don't exist. And if your first instinct in a world without these rules is to start breaking the ones that do exist, then this is not a commentary on atheism. It's something else entirely.
Right.
Now, you can never assure yourself fully that you'll be getting away with it.
Right.
But let's say you could, and you're really an atheist. You really believe there's no God out there. There really is no morality. And you see an opportunity to steal from your employer or to steal cash from the cash register because nobody's watching, there's no cameras, whatever it is, no police in sight. Nobody will ever be able to track you. Why not?
And here it is, the big hypothetical. He says, if you're really an atheist and there's no God and no one is watching, then why not steal from the cash register? Well, I'll tell you why not. Because stealing causes real, measurable harm. I've managed convenience stores. If someone steals from the register, I'm the one who has to go hunting it down. I have to check the drops, dig through the receipts, figure out which shift went short, and then I have to deduct the difference from the deposit. That means the store reports a loss, and that affects profitability. And if we can't find out who did it, guess what? It's still on me. I get written up, raises get delayed, corporate starts cutting hours, prices go up. That affects everyone who shops at that store. So yeah, we don't need divine surveillance to know it's wrong. We don't steal, not just because we want to be seen as good, but because we understand that actions have consequences beyond ourselves. That's called empathy. That's called moral reasoning. The irony here is, he frames atheism as if it necessarily leads to this moral opportunism, but that's just his own past behavior talking. What he's really telling us is, if I thought no one was watching, I'd be totally fine with doing harm to others. And that right there is the real red flag. This is the same line of thinking as when people ask, if there is no God, what's stopping you from killing people? And honestly, if the only thing stopping you from hurting people is your belief in God, then by all means, please keep believing. I want you to keep believing in your God, because your way of thinking makes you a danger to society without it. The rest of us, the ones operating from empathy, accountability, and a sense of shared well-being, we're not moral in spite of being atheists. We're moral because we actually thought about it. We're moral because we actually care. And that's the end of his video. So rather than doing a whole summary, I'm going to move straight into the next part. I want to talk about this video. What was going on in it? What was Barak thinking? Was he thinking? I'll call this section a case study in bad apologetics. What we just watched wasn't just a bad moral argument. It was a glimpse into a broken way of thinking. This wasn't logic gone wrong. It was a worldview baring its teeth. See, in this framework, unless morality comes from their specific God, not just any God, not general theism, but their particular interpretation of a divine lawgiver, then morality just doesn't exist. It's not just inadequate or incomplete, it's impossible. And here's the kicker. If you don't agree with that, if you say, actually, I care about people and well-being without a God, then suddenly you're not just wrong, you're lying, deluded, or secretly immoral. And that's the real danger here. This isn't a debate about ethics, it's a moral monopoly, and everyone outside the club gets painted as broken or corrupt. This isn't about truth, it's about control. So let's touch on that personal anecdote, because it tells us a lot. He says that when he was an atheist, he played by the rules only to avoid getting arrested. But that's not what honest atheism looks like. That's what barely restrained criminality looks like. He's not describing a thoughtful rejection of belief. He's describing someone whose only moral filter was a fear of punishment. And here's the underlying dangerous point. He presents this as if it's what atheism leads to, but really, it's just what he was like when he didn't think God was watching. He puts it out there like a critique of atheism, but really, it's a confession about his own moral immaturity. This whole argument is projection. He can't imagine being good without a supernatural threat, so he assumes no one else can either. But all he's really doing is holding up a mirror and pretending it's a window. At the heart of this apologetic is a sneaky little move, and it's easy to miss if you're not looking for it. He never actually argues that morality comes from his God. He assumes it. That's the hidden premise. Morality equals God, period. And if you don't start with that, then nothing else counts. But that's not an argument, that's circular reasoning. They've baked the conclusion into the premise. So of course, by that logic, if you don't believe in God, then you can't have morality. But all that proves is that the definition was rigged from the start. Worse, this leads to a dangerous place, the view known as divine command theory, the idea that something is moral because God commands it. Which means if God commands slavery, genocide, or rape, it's moral. And guess what? Those things are in the Bible, sometimes explicitly commanded. Are we supposed to say that those were good because God said so? Or are we using our own moral sense to say, no, that can't be right? This is the same dilemma Socrates pointed out 2,400 years ago in the Euthyphro dialogue. Is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it's good? And let's be honest, most Christians today don't act like they follow divine command theory. They don't stone people for picking up sticks on the Sabbath, they don't support genocide or selling daughters into slavery. They're already using their own moral reasoning and then retrofitting that onto Scripture, which is fine, but it proves the point. Morality isn't coming from the text, it's coming from the person reading it. So this is one of the most common and laziest tricks in the apologetics playbook, the false dichotomy. Either morality comes from God, or it's just chaos. Just personal opinion. Might makes right. Nothing means anything. But that's not just wrong, it's willfully wrong. Because we've had entire fields of moral philosophy, from Aristotle to today, that build ethics without appealing to the supernatural. Secular systems like humanism, consequentialism, and virtue ethics are based on empathy, reciprocity, and real-world outcomes. They ask, what reduces harm? What promotes well-being? What helps societies thrive? We don't need a divine dictator to tell us that kicking puppies is bad. We don't need scripture to know that compassion matters. We can see suffering. We can feel empathy. Saying morality without God is just opinion is just like saying medicine without God is just guesswork. It's not only false, it's a complete misunderstanding of how people actually make moral decisions. Let's be honest, even most Christians don't get their morality from divine command. Not really. They pick and choose all the time. They ignore the bans on shellfish, they don't stone disobedient children, they dismiss slavery passages or genocide orders as contextual or metaphorical, and you know what? I'm glad they do. But that picking and choosing proves the point. They're already using a different standard to filter the Bible through. They're using empathy, social norms, and a sense of fairness, not just God says so. Because real-life morality isn't about quoting a rulebook. It's how we treat each other. It's about harm, compassion, reciprocity, fairness, all the messy human stuff we navigate every day. You don't need a Bible to know cruelty is wrong. You don't need divine permission to help someone in need. You just need a functioning brain, some lived experience, and the willingness to care. Let's strip it all down. Here's a simple test. Can you name a moral or immoral action, any action, that doesn't in some way affect the well-being of conscious creatures? No? Exactly. Like I talked about in the first part, stealing causes harm, lying erodes trust, violence creates suffering. On the flip side, honesty builds connection, generosity lifts people up, empathy heals. Morality isn't about obeying a list of cosmic rules. It's about the real-world consequences of our actions, how we affect others, what kind of world our choices create. And no, that's not moral relativism or chaos. It's not just your opinion, because we can measure well-being, we can observe suffering, we can test policies, revise standards, and apply ethics consistently, all without appealing to the supernatural. The beauty of this approach is that it scales. It works across cultures, belief systems, and societies, because it's rooted in something we all share, our capacity to suffer and our desire to flourish. Let's not sugarcoat it. Barack's core message boils down to, if God's not watching, I'd rob that register. So he's moved away from morality and is talking about fear-based compliance. Real morality isn't about surveillance. It's about empathy, accountability, understanding that our actions ripple outward and affect real people in real ways. The rest of us are just trying to build a world where people do good because it helps, not because we're afraid of hellfire. So when someone says, without God, why not steal or kill or cheat? As if it's a deep question, just know that it's a confession. If your entire moral framework collapses the moment the divine security camera shuts off, then maybe it's not my worldview that needs reevaluating. Maybe it's your compass that's broken and not mine. That's it for this one. So now, what do you think? Do you find this kind of apologetics as bad and lazy as I do? Or do you think there's something more that I missed? Let me know in the comments below. This kind of apologetics really frustrates me. Not because they present any special challenge or are difficult to deal with, but more that it is directly insulting to me as an atheist and as a human. And I know some of you feel the same way. So if you appreciate this diatribe, let me know by hitting that like button. And if you like more scathing but fair videos delivered directly to your YouTubes, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Speaking of a moral compass, I need to direct the most thanks to my patrons, especially Calaminus, Anima, and Sora. And a fresh coat of paint welcome to Martin, who joins all the magnetic personalities that guide my channel in the right moral direction. But if you would like to be the ethical North Pole, you can join them for as low as $1 a month at patreon.com/darkofalltrades. Though every single one of you who stick around to the end, hang out in the Discord, link in the description, hang out in the live chat, leave a comment, like, subscribe, whatever you do to get more eyes on the channel really encourage me to do better and make more unique content. Here at Dark of All Trades, I know you have a choice in your Atheist Counter Apologetics channel, so the fact that you chose mine means 20 minutes a week for you, but an entire world to me. Thank you. And as always, keep learning.
Can an atheist be a moral person? Why or why not? I'm waiting.
Your idea of what is good and evil comes from the Bible, even if you don't want to believe it.
If there is no God, it's just your opinion against, say, Hitler's opinion. It's just your opinion against bin Laden's opinion. We all intuitively understand that certain things are objectively right and objectively wrong.
Because if you're an atheist, there is no moral absolute. There's relative morality, which means my atheist friends have to say, in order to be intellectually consistent, from my perspective, child abuse is wrong. But my perspective is totally relative. And you take that to its logical conclusion, what you have to acknowledge is, if you define abusing children as being good, I can't look at you and say you're wrong. I can simply say, from my perspective, you're wrong. But you've got your perspective, I've got my perspective, it's all relative.
When atheists say that they don't need the Bible to be able to tell right from wrong, and then they support abortion, they're just proving that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, including moral wisdom. If you reject God, you will believe in the craziest things.
Human-built societies actually reflect our biology, and then we would form these societies based on what seemed to be other than our biology. We began to care for the weaker and fight against injustice. And we did this in the name of religion, because all men were created in the image of God, and therefore have value, which is why it's not an easy task to divorce religion from morality.
The Christian worldview teaches that morality is an expression of God's nature as he revealed it to us. Morality is rooted in God's stance, if you like. So it's not stance independent from God, but it stands independent from you and me.
Because apart from the Christian worldview, apart from the Bible, apart from God, there is no absolute standard of morality, and you can't condemn anything as right or wrong.
Moral decisions require categories like good and evil, and these arise from the moral law, which requires a moral lawgiver.
If you're going to make a claim that something is better or worse as a moral question, then you are now taking recourse to such a religious view.
There's just something about evil and wrongdoing that just does not sit right in the heart of man. And what God does through his law is it shows us the consequential nature of our immorality.
If there is no God, there is no moral law, because there's no moral lawgiver to say, this is right and that is wrong. And he said, God exists, because if God does not exist, you have no basis for your argument that this is wrong and this is right. So when your skeptical friend says, this seems wrong, I would say your sense of injustice in this situation, it challenges your atheism. Because only if there is a God can you say, this is wrong and this is right.
When you leave religion and when you leave the concept of God in totality, it opens you up to a big can of worms. Like you're putting yourself in a very big mess because you have no morals. We're just a rearrangement of matter. You've lost all morality. The second you go down this path of there's no God, you've lost all morality. Who cares?
But no atheist can ground their morality in anything objective. So that's where the problem of atheism lies.
And so that's why my religion